Finding a new job is stressful. But with Indeed, it doesn't have to be. Just fill out your Indeed profile with your skills, experience, and desired salary. The more you fill out, the better your matches will be. And hearing from hiring managers will be 2 times more likely. Relax. That's your Indeed profile sending opportunities your way. Indeed, the world can work better.
How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Visit USAA.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the show. Well, today is the very first episode of Dr. Emma and me. And if you haven't been following us on social media, well, this is the big announcement for you now. Every Thursday, Dr. Emma is going to be joining me for special episodes. Welcome, Emma.
Hi, I'm so excited, Rebecca. I can't even tell you how excited I am about this and all the freedom you gave me to start this new adventure. I'm excited.
Take it easy. I didn't give you that much freedom.
We'll talk about it. Off record.
Off record. Once I hit stop recording.
Okay. Where's the list of grievances? Let me see here. Let me start one right now. Started when
See, this is what happens when you get Emma and I together. We just have a lot of fun, and I think this is going to be good for both of us because we enjoy each other's company. Obviously, we both love history, and your knowledge and my knowledge together, I think, is going to make this a lot of fun. And today we're going to kind of start off on a series, and we're starting off with parallel lives, aren't we?
Yes, parallel lives of. There's a lot of people who will automatically know what that means. It was a very famous book written by a very famous guy from antiquity called Plutarch. And he had the very, very smart idea to write a very interesting book comparing lives of people and calling it parallel lives. So because we like to, focus so much on the people that lived in the Tudor period or the Renaissance period, we're going to talk about many things, I think, in this Thursday episode. I think that's a great way to start with parallel lives of people we've loved. We know the public loves, and we know a little bit about.
Well, and we're starting off with 2 people who I think we've talked about a lot on this show. We can't talk about enough.
Really?
Have we?
And that you didn't meet me 15 years ago when I started. Oh my goodness, this is I think that's part of the reason why I had to move to America to start new life after so much talking about them in Spain.
Start new with a fresh
People
audience.
don't want to hear about it anymore.
No, but we know that people who listen to this show love to hear about women in history. And of course, we know you are a Katherine of Aragon specialist. So we're going to start with Katherine of Aragon.
Katherine of Aragon specialist.
I'm going to put that up on the video. The Katherine of Aragon specialist.
Put the record straight from.
Okay, so whose life does Katherine of Aragon's parallel?
Well, the other one that I like to talk about all the time, one of the 2 probably. I like to talk a lot about her daughter, Mary, but who is the most important one really is the matriarch, Isabel of Castile, who everybody loves, who's like an iconic queen, who opened the door really for other women to rule, like her namesake Elizabeth I of England. So maybe we could do a future episode about Isabel and Elizabeth because they also had parallel lives. So yeah, Isabel is iconic. What can I say?
She really is iconic. When I think of her, I just think of this like strong woman. I don't know another word that I can use for her other than strong. If you had to use one word, I feel like I've asked you this question before. How would you describe Isabella?
Isabel, determined.
That's the same word that you used last time. Now I remember.
Was it? Oh, I am repeating myself. Oh, I need to find a new place to live. So
It's time to move.
People in Minnesota are starting to know about my obsession with Isabel and Catherine and these people.
Yeah, determined. I think that strong and determined is a great way.
Strong-willed, determined. And I think because of that determination she had and the way she carried herself with that determination, she taught her children. And Catherine of Aragon had the same way about herself. I think Catherine of Aragon, because of her role as a consort instead of as a ruling queen, used to take on a more gentle role because she had to use other means like persuasion and she's, for example, Catherine is described as always smiling, as always pleasant. But in the case of Isabel, she is described almost like an icon. And the reason for this is also because of her. She was very smart. And all these things that amazing works we have praising her as a queen were usually written because she asked the writer to write it. So it's propaganda, really. She built her self-image, her image as queen, with the patronage of literature and art. You know, there's many, many artworks in Spain and other places that represent Isabel of Castile. I mean, many places with statues to her, the portraits in many royal collections, like the British Royal Collection, one of the earliest portraits of her, that has a similar version, very similar version in the Prado Museum. Both those works were in the collection of Catherine of Aragon. So, I mean, the mother and daughter cannot be understood without each other. That's why I thought, you know, we could start with this episode of Parallel Lives.
Yeah.
I'm talking too much already. I can
You're fired. You made it 5 minutes into the first episode.
I knew it.
No, I think it's interesting because we always talk about the influence that Catherine of Aragon had at English court, especially when it came to art.
Yeah.
What is there a parallel thing as far as art goes with Isabel as well? Like, was she as, I don't know if innovative is the word that I'm looking for, but did she have as much influence at the Spanish court?
What a difficult question to answer, because the first thing that crossed my mind is that she had more. But saying that, Catherine's patronage is so innovative in many ways that, and again, I want to go back to this different position they both have. In the case of Isabel, since she was a ruling queen, she had means, money, finances to basically show us and leave for posterity all this patronage. And it still remains in Spain because her lineage continued through her daughter and Charles V and all that. In the case of Catherine of Aragon, it's very different. She was a consort, so a lot of the things she did was through, like I said, influence. So she wouldn't be the one paying, but she was the one to bring Pietro Torrigiano. She was the one to bring Hans Holbein. And she was the one to ask Juan Luis Vives to write a manual of education, like her mother had asked others to do for her daughters. But in this case, she asked him to write it for all Christian women. And that's a revolution in education that has no parallel. The preconditions are in Isabel of Castile, but Isabel of Castile didn't go as far as that. She wanted the members of her court to be educated and the elites. In the case of Vives and Catalina or Catherine, they're deciding that it's going to be all Christian women. But it's all because of the consequence of the education that Isabel gave to Catherine, that she's just from a new generation too. So, you know, the Renaissance is advancing, humanism is advancing. Isabel wasn't educated as a child, didn't learn Latin as a child. And Catherine of Aragon was probably the best Latinist in Europe at a point. Said by Erasmus of Rotterdam, not me.
The new McCrispy Strip is here. Dip approved by ketchup, tangy barbecue, honey mustard, Sprite, McFlurry, Big Mac sauce, double dipped in buffalo and ranch, more ranch, and creamy chili McCrispy Strip Dip. Now at McDonald's. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Ah, smart water. Pure, crisp taste.
That's really good water.
It's the kind of water that says, I have my life together.
I do feel more sophisticated.
Smart water. For those with a taste for taste. Grab yours today.
I'm fascinated by these two women. Obviously, it's a mother and daughter duo that we have on today's episode of Parallel Lives. Let's just start off with some of the parallels that you see in addition to what we just talked about.
Big parallels. When an ambassador of Margaret of Austria met Catherine of Aragon in 1514, in the summer of 1514 in London, when he was coming to try to save the marriage between Mary Rose Tudor, the sister of Henry VIII, and the future Charles V, he described the Queen as he was struck that Catherine of Aragon looked so much like her mother, Isabel. So of all the daughters of Isabel and Fernando, she was the one that looked more like her mother. And that obviously gives you an advantage when you're like a mini version of the, most badass queen in the world, right?
Yeah, right.
And she was the youngest and the most gifted intellectually. So, and she just was a laid back person in many ways. And the way she behaved, not that she was laid back, she was very determined and strong-willed, but she just had an ease with people. She was the perfect courtier, really. And she was brought up to be that, to be able to not show bad emotions or too many emotions in public, but yes, have a good way to make people like you. Some people have that ability, Rebecca.
I am a little bit curious too, because Catherine of Aragon had older sisters. Do you think that she was so, I don't know if worldly is the word that I'm looking for, and she was so educated? Do you think that's because Isabel had already raised these older siblings, and by the time it got to Catherine, she was like, okay, now I got this down?
Yes. And not all of them were easy. So the one that succeeded is really Isabel. Joanna, dubbed for many centuries as Joanna the Mad, Joan the Mad, versus her husband, Philip the Handsome. Yeah, right. This is like the patriarchy speaking, right? Like this. Juana, was she insane? Was she not? Whatever she was, she had a difficult relationship with her mother. Very difficult. She was the one that ambassador that I just mentioned also mentions, saying she looks so different to her sister, the Queen of Castile, so to Juana. So Catherine and Juana didn't look very much alike, because Juana looked a lot more like her father, who had darker hair. You have to think that Catherine and Isabel both were redheads. Catherine more even than Isabel.
They probably looked like me.
Yes, and they had blue eyes, so they did look a lot like you. Versus Juana having, a brown, like looking more like her father. But not just looking more like her father, having probably more a character like her father, because, but in a woman, it's taken differently.
Yes, it is.
And Juana and Isabel had a very difficult relationship, and abusive even. So imagine then having a little girl, your youngest, who is just the pearl of your eye, and she's just perfect in every way for what you need and what you want. It just turned out perfect for her that her youngest daughter, the one who remained with her the longest too, so saw really all of the glory of Isabel's reign, because her first daughter was born in the midst of a civil war, left 3 years to go to Portugal. She's had a very different life to Catalina. So Isabel, the eldest, Isabel Junior, she's called by my good friend Ruth Martinez Alcorlo. Dr. Martinez Alcorlo is the person who's written the biography of this eldest infanta, published in Spain. She had a very different life. But these experiences with Isabel, with Juana, and with Maria, who was closer in age to Catherine and was the one that was raised with her, basically. And those two were have very similar. They seem to be very similar. Maria too had a very tame character, if you want to call it, or it was Juana really who had a bit. And Isabel, when she comes back from her first marriage because her husband had died, she refuses to marry again, and she says she wants to go into a convent. That's what Catherine says when Arthur dies too. When they're like, when Henry VII is like, well, maybe I'll take you as my wife, and she's like, I'm going into the convent. I'm gonna write to my mother. And Isabel is not like her daughter Catherine, or is like a daughter Catherine in many ways and respects, because she's always very nice to Henry VII until he proposes that, and then Mama Bear comes out, and she's like, "Excuse me, old man, send her back home right now." And Henry's like, okay. That was just a joke. Let's marry her to the future Henry VIII. Oh, poor Catherine. She should have gone back home, probably.
Well, I'm glad she didn't. Had she gone back home, we wouldn't know her as well, I think, when it comes to the Tudor period, at least.
That's true. But I don't know. That's true. It's all Henry's fault. You're right.
It's always Henry's fault.
It's all Henry's fault.
It's going to be the theme of every episode, I think. It's Henry's fault.
You think so? It's been the theme of our, the whole time I've been participating in this podcast. People know that.
I want to talk about the Spanish princess, because we've only briefly covered this topic with you on this show. And I feel like of all the series that we've had based off of books and whatnot, the Spanish princess was the hardest for me to watch, because I've just felt like it portrayed, I don't know, Catherine in a way. I guess I don't even know what I'm saying. I just felt like there was.
That's what I was thinking. But I can tell you something about this that I think you like. I've been asked about this many times, not just the Spanish princess, but the general depictions of, appearances of Catherine of Aragon in shows and things like this and that.
Yeah.
Till this day, till today, I have to say they're all dreadful. All of them. First of all, there's never been a Spanish actress cast as Catherine of Aragon. And that is the biggest mistake. Because Spanish actresses speak English. So, I'm thinking of Michelle Jenner, who played Isabel of Castile in the series Isabel, and she could be a perfect Catherine. I already said this in social media several times.
Yeah.
Michelle Jenner, please, if you're listening to this, you didn't answer my last DM. I'm only kidding. So that's the first thing I would say. That and it gets to a point where I feel it's a bit offensive, even. There's perfectly fine Spanish actresses that can play that role. Not saying that it should be in every series, but come on, once. Because in the case of Isabel, her mother, yes, there has been some Spanish actresses that have played her in different shows, films, and like that. But the casting wasn't that great either. And even if you're going to cast someone, well, you have to kind of make them look like the historical, in my opinion, make them look like the historical character. If you're casting someone with brown hair, Isabel had reddish hair, just put a wig on the woman, I don't know. That would be and then why I'm saying you have to cast someone from Spain. You can't replicate a Spanish accent speaking in English, because it sounds ridiculous coming from a person whose language is English. If you're casting an English person who speaks perfectly Spanish, okay, I'll buy that. But really, it should be someone from Spain in all depictions. Yeah. In The Spanish Princess, at least, they got kind of her appearance right. But I don't think Catherine was as advanced in many ways and respects. And, let's just point it out. I don't think she was that flirty and sexual, to be honest, in front of everyone, like she is in the show, and they're just finding corners to do that. But that's just the way those shows are, right?
Yeah. Well, in that show, I feel like she really comes off as knowing she is the daughter of this powerful monarch. Mm-hmm. Like there is that essence about her where she is like, I am the daughter of, I
think that they capture that right. In that sense, yes. The fact that she's beautiful and young and educated and prepared. But then, I'm sorry to say, she says, my mother Isabel, she says something, or I come from the Trastamara dynasty, and you're like, oh, it's so cringe. I can't do it. That's why I don't watch those shows.
Yeah, that one was my least favorite of all of them. But the part that I love about Catherine and Isabel is that they were portrayed as like warrior queens, right?
Yes.
And
And this has been big debate over this because this pushback saying, but it's true. They were. Isabel and Catherine, when she was a child, was very close to the action in the tents next to Fernando, who was fighting the war. So Isabel did have armor, did have things that she would wear, and was a symbol for the troops. She was pregnant all the time during the war too. So it was like a new hope. We're fighting for this queen who's giving us all these royals' children, while her husband is physically fighting for who is going to be the monarch, who is the monarch too, because they co-rule. We have to remember this.
Yeah.
Is fighting. It's the perfect tandem, really. So she's used as a symbol. And then Catherine is left as a regent in 1513 by Henry VIII when he goes and fights in France with Maximilian I. And she's heavily pregnant. We know that too. And she does get an armor when the Scots invade, when James IV invades. She does get her armor ready. She does ask the jeweler to make her to adjust a crown and put the stone in it. And then, thanks to one of her teachers, who is in Valladolid, sometime later we know that she gave a speech to the troops before they marched north, and that she herself was leading another battalion that was coming afterwards that wasn't needed because there was such a great victory. So they were just both iconic military leaders, female military leaders. They weren't in the battle, but they were symbols, and they were talking to the troops. Imagine her teacher says that the troops were fired by her words because she said, and she knew what to say to people, right? First of all, she made sure they had enough beer, which was very smart. So the beer's coming with us, guys. If we win, we crack it open. And the Brits kind of like beer a little bit. So I think that was the determining factor for sure. She paid them up front because the previous year in Navarre, they had many problems and she was like, not under my watch. You pay these guys, you give them beer, and they were fired by her words because she said that God smiled to those who were doing his deed and that every nation knew that the English were the bravest. Come on, Catherine. Thank you, Queen. Yes, slaying, How can you not be fired by that when the daughter of Isabel of Castile, who conquered Granada, is telling you this?
Yeah.
And you have some cold beer waiting for you. And you're taking Spanish cannons with gunpowder from Italy.
Every time we talk about Catherine of Aragon, I just
and 5013. Oh, my favorite year of all time.
I just love her with 1513 when we talk about it. I just love it because I always come back to the same thing every single time, don't I? Talk about her like wanting to send Henry the body of James IV.
I need to tell you an anecdote that you're going to be like, how have you not told me this before?
I'm listening.
Okay. So she's reporting about the invasion, the Scottish invasion, right? To Wolsey and also to Henry. One of the times, she tells Henry that things are going well because this English woman from the north had captured 3 Scotsmen herself. And I'm like, who is this diva? Who is this diva capturing 3 Scotsmen? You know how Scotsmen are? I mean, first of all, you need to understand what they're saying. And then they're like, these are big guys. But I mean, the women in the north of England are big too. I come from the north of England. I know how people are up there. They're pretty big and, and feisty. So just these things, she was proud of those things, She wasn't just proud of her troops. She was proud that everybody had said, we are behind our queen. And they just that was James IV shouldn't have done that. Sorry, James.
Yeah. What was he
That
thinking?
paved the way for Scotland and England to be united. And she never gets credit for that.
Was James IV just not aware of, I don't know, the power of Spain and the power of the children of Spain? It's mind-boggling.
Well, there were ships sent from France to help him.
Of
But
course.
there were also ships sent from Spain
Yeah.
to help Catherine. No, he didn't. And he didn't know, probably, or he thought that she wouldn't know how to use it, or that this machinery from the War of Granada, this modern war, was coming to him. And he was taking, he was with his sword and his horse, and, his people were, it was the cavalry, and they couldn't do anything because the new war was there. The Spanish monarchy was bringing the new war. And a cannon has a far reach that, no horse is going to beat. So, no, I don't think he was aware.
I feel like his wife, Margaret Tudor, the sister of Henry VIII, may have warned him, like, hey, I know Catherine.
Yeah.
I know about her. You better watch out, buddy. And he was like, I'm a man. I got this.
And
Hold my beer.
And as soon as that happened, one of the first things that Catherine does is reach out to Margaret and say how sorry she is. She's like, I'm sorry your husbands are so stupid. How are you, sis? And Margaret comes and visits London and is a regent because they do have a child, James V. And it's all a mess because she's not ready to be a regent because she's never been raised for that.
Right.
Talking again about parallel lives. Parallel lives, Margaret and Mary, Henry VIII's sisters, weren't educated like Catherine of Aragon, not even close. But they were by Catherine in a way, because as soon as Catherine is somebody in the Tudor court, she starts ordering these translations. All she has is reading in Latin, speaking in Latin to the ambassadors, to Henry. Henry VII was took her as an ambassadress in the blink of an eye. He didn't, why? Because you come and you say 3 phrases in Latin. He's like, okay. He knew she was very bookish too. When the Spanish people left after the big entourage that she brought for the wedding with Arthur left, the first thing that Henry VII did was take her to his library in Richmond.
Oh.
So just to let her know that this was also a Renaissance court. So in that sense, Catherine has also preconditions in England to then have that great court that she has with Henry. Just like a little bit Isabel had in the court of her brother Henry, but just not as much. And then Catherine, Henry VII wanted to impress Catherine because he knew about Isabel. They had been corresponding since she was born.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Henry when Isabel and Fernando conquered Granada in January of 1492, and the news reached Henry VII, he jumped up and started singing Te Deo Laudeamus. So we praise you, God. It's a song, typical song for celebrations. And he sent all the bells for the new churches in the Kingdom of Granada from England.
Wow.
The records are there. Yeah. So we could go to Granada and go to the churches, and those bells, if they're from that time, they were sent from England by Henry VII. Just how happy he was. It was so that achievement alone gave Catherine a prestige in England that I think that was one of the troubles with Henry. He could not have that glorious past. Even though Henry VII was very impressive, nobody was as impressive as Isabel I of Castile.
That's a lot of pressure for somebody.
Yeah. Well, sorry, Henry, but you didn't, no. Who do you admire more? Isabel of Castile or Henry VIII?
No, that's not even a question. We call him the tool, so clearly it's not Henry VIII.
He was such a copycat, too. Do you want me to tell you a little story about Henry being a copycat?
Oh, I'd love this. Yeah, go for it.
So, it's just so annoying. So Vives, Juan Luis Vives, who was a humanist from the Crown of Aragon, from Valencia, who became famous in Bruges and those, and was friends with Erasmus and learned Greek over there. Yeah, he's a very smart guy. Was recruited by Catherine and taught in Oxford, and recruited by Wolsey to teach humanism and Greek and things in Oxford. And he wrote several books for the education of Mary Tudor, because we said there wasn't any manuals to educate princesses in England, right?
Yeah.
So he writes several of these works. One of them, published in 1529, called the Duties of the Husband, when Henry VIII is trying to divorce Catherine. Praising Catherine, saying she's a beacon that will be remembered for the endless times because she's the best ever. Boo, Henry VIII kind of deal. But Henry's so petty that he copies one of these books and he tries to pass it on his own. He authors it and is a copy. So, for example, when he allegedly writes, in response to Luther, and he writes that famous piece contesting Luther, and he gets the title of Defender of the Faith. So does Catherine, because she's also having her humanists write things, but it's Henry who's appropriating all these things to look cool when he hasn't done anything. He's just copying from others. So he probably had his scribe say, just change a few things and just change the title and just say, I wrote it.
Who's going to argue with him?
Time. Sorry, Henry, we now know. But no, it was not yours. It was not yours. And it was just a lame copy, even. Like, change it a bit, man. Come on.
Sorry, not
but
sorry.
That's just a way to show the admiration, really, that he had for the patronage that his wife was doing. But it wasn't enough because Mary was a girl.
Right.
And in that sense, Isabel has a parallel life also to Catherine. I'm getting all the names confused now. Because she did have a boy. She did raise a boy. She did have an heir, Juan. But he died when she was still alive. So she only had daughters after that. And Juana was the next one in line, and they weren't getting along. And she was married to another Henry VIII, Philip of Habsburg. Don't call him Philip the Fair or the Handsome. He wasn't. Let's Google the pictures of Philip the Handsome.
Should we go back to the story of the ship and his reaction?
Oh yeah. And Juana, you know how badass you are. And this is not really some people say this showed that she was crazy, because how could you be, normal in the midst of a storm that's probably going to kill you? Well, there's an explanation for that. And it's because they were raised with a new way of thinking, and these humanists taught them many new things. And among them was the recovery of certain ideas from the past, and Stoicism. Stoicism was one of them. And Catherine mentions this several times to Vives. It's just when things get bad, just become this rock, because this too shall pass. And if you're a rock and you don't show emotion, it means you are chosen by God, right?
Yeah.
And that if you keep it cool when everything's going, when shit's going down in the podcast, people admire you too, because you give them that strength to continue. And Philip wasn't raised like that. So, or in that moment, wilted, because I would.
Yeah.
I mean, it was scary. I've been on a ship that wasn't moving that much, but I've been so seasick sometimes that I get it, that you're just like, this is the end of me. But that was when they ended up in the court of Henry the Seventh.
Yeah.
And those, there's a very cool source that talks about that trip that isn't very used hasn't been very used in the Tudor books, and talks about how Henry does a tour for Philip, and Philip is admiring his new palaces and saying, oh, I'll build a palace like this in Brussels. And they exchanged many things. And Catherine saw her sister, Juana, for the last time, just briefly, because Philip wouldn't allow it.
Okay, we have to go back to the ship, because you didn't even tell the funniest part of the whole story.
Oh, I didn't tell the funniest part of the story. It's true. Well, so Juana and Felipe are king and queen of Castile. So but they live in Flanders because he's Archduke of of Austria and all that. So they live in Flanders. And when Isabel of Castile dies, they have to go all the way to Spain to rule in Castile. So they're trying to get there. And Philip is like, let's go. And people are like, no, it's a bad season. We shouldn't go now. He's like, we're going. So they went.
Look at
And
me,
what
I'm
happened?
handsome. We're going.
And what happened? There was a storm, a very bad storm, and even a lot of people died. A lot of people died. And when their boat was about to sink, even though they survived, there's an anecdote that Philip was crying was like imploring God, save me, while Queen Juana the First said, "Don't worry, I've never heard of a queen who drowned."
I love it. I love that story.
I don't know. Maybe listeners could tell us if there's a story, because a lot of these humanists in these books that are writing for these women to get educated, they mention women from the past, famous women from the past, Lucretia from Rome, or all of the saints, and all these women that were examples for them to use as behavior examples. Now I'm trying to think, probably Juana was thinking, I've read about all these women in the past, and then many of them were queens, and I've never heard of any of them drowning. So God doesn't allow that to happen. Maybe that was her thought process in that stressful time. And Philip was like, I'm not really the king, so, because he wasn't, he was king by marriage.
He's like, you're going to be saved and I'm going to be at
You're
the
going
bottom
to be
of the
saved
ocean.
and I'm going to drown. Ugh. And it was all my idea.
But I'm so pretty and people
But
are
I'm
going to miss me.
handsome. Just like Henry VIII. We should do Philip the Handsome and Henry VIII, parallel lives, because there was an ambassador once. I love ambassadors. They're so juicy, especially the Italian ones, that said one time about Henry VIII, he would even be pretty if he was a woman. I don't know. This isn't, I went down a rabbit hole the other day thinking about this. If you want to talk about it, I was like, Henry did have a lot of male friends in his youth that were very.
Oh, we're going there.
Young bunch. I don't know. Fun guy. Brandon. We all know who Brandon is, right?
Oh, here we go. Here's Henry Cavill. He makes his appearance.
That was you. I didn't say anything. I didn't mention his name.
You set me up to say it for you. Anybody who's listening knows that Emma loves to talk about Henry Cavill. He
should play Henry VIII in that new TV show that's going to be Netflix, please call us, with Michelle Jenner as Catherine of Aragon.
Oh, that would be good. Yeah.
And I will personally talk to the cast to make sure they know everything about the historical events that occurred. So,
And I will personally talk to Henry Cavill.
You or me?
No, I will.
Oh, okay.
I'm just going to push you out of the way and take Henry Cavill.
Well, I'm the co-host, so I have to be there.
Okay, that's fine. Whatever. Okay. I could share. He would make it better.
The wardrobe.
We were talking about people looking like historical figures. I feel like one of them that I let slide by is always Jonathan Rhys-Meyers. I let him slide by. I just feel like there was something about him as an actor where he showed me Henry VIII, even though he didn't look like him.
Yeah, but I mean, when this guy is described time and again as being the tallest person in the court, with ginger hair and like sort of, we know like what that kind of people look like, and it's not Jonathan. Sorry, no, it didn't. Not for me.
I mean, I don't know. It's been my experience that.
Who would you cast for Henry VIII?
Oh gosh.
And Catherine of Aragon. Well, Catherine of Aragon we already have. But.
Yeah, I like that. Who would I cast for Henry VIII? Well, now that you've said Henry Cavill, I can't get that out of my head. As long as he has, red hair.
Welcome to my world.
I don't know who else would be a good Henry. I mean, Damian Lewis, I thought was a good Henry VIII. He looked the part.
Where's a good place to look always?
Where?
In TV shows like Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. Those people, Yeah, I mean, you can wear a wig. You can wear, I don't know. It needs to be a tall guy. I'm sorry to say.
It does. Yeah. I liked
That's the
Jude.
way he was described. That's the way he was known. And that was a thing about his persona that just was striking about him.
Yeah. How did I make this conversation about Henry VIII again? We're not here to talk about the tool. We're here to talk about his
About
mother-in-law and his wife.
his mother-in-law, who he had two pictures of his mother-in-law.
Oh.
Presumably one of them painted during his reign for his wife. I can imagine when they were talking about marrying Mary or not, or this or that, and I can imagine Catherine just taking out the picture of her mother and being like, "What do you think my mother would think about this? Huh? Oh, let me take the picture of my father, the most powerful man in Christendom." Yeah, they did have those pictures with them. So they were a presence for sure. They are mentioned in the books that Vives wrote for the because Catherine needs desperately to use Isabel as an example for Henry to get in his mind that Mary could succeed him. I mean, nobody wanted a boy more than Catherine of Aragon too,
Right.
And that when she was pregnant in 1513, she had a miscarriage, and she went to do a pilgrimage to Walsingham to ask for a boy. She when her boy was born in January of 1511, and in New Year's, she was the first one to tell Margaret of Austria, one of her best friends in the world, in a little message she sent her in French, saying that she was, she had a boy and she was his godmother. And Pietro Torrigiano makes pomegranates that are painted to do a scene of the Epiphany of the three wise men that year. So that's how much Catherine loved her little boy when he was born. And there was a tournament done for him where John Blanc was her trumpeter. I know Michael is going to love that I say that Michael Hujuru, Dr. Michael Hujuru is going to love that I say that he was her trumpeter, because he's like, it's Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, Michael, because
Don't forget.
he came from Spain. But what I'm saying is nobody wanted it more than Catherine, but it didn't happen that way. And she believed that was God's will, and you couldn't go against that. That's why people have said for centuries she was so stubborn. There was no other way in her head things would turn out than the way God wanted them to turn out.
Yeah.
People need to understand this. Same way for Henry. It's just Henry was changing all the time, his story. Now I think that we were never married. Excuse me?
Yeah. Well, it was whatever benefited Henry, really.
I'm not thinking about that. We should do a parallel lives of Catherine and Anne Boleyn, because I was thinking, we always say when Henry communicated to Catherine that he thought that they were no longer to get married or whatever. I would have wanted to see in a little, just peeking into a little scene, the first time that Catherine of Aragon saw Anne Boleyn after that.
I like this. Okay, so
I'm sure she wasn't smiling.
No, we're coming up with all these ideas for future episodes of Parallel Lives. So if you're listening right now and you have an idea of parallel lives that you'd want us to discuss, make sure that you message us. Anywhere.
And if you're Plutarch, we're really sorry we copied your idea, but you didn't get the copyright, so.
I feel like Henry VIII.
Yes, we are like Henry VIII. I've always said, as much as I talk a lot about Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII and all these characters that are not my favorite, maybe it's because I can relate to them a bit too much. I'm not judging them. I'm just saying that it's the way it is.
Okay, well, we're winding down on our first episode together, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to name one more similarity that we haven't covered today about Isabel and Catherine of Aragon.
Okay. I think that they were both about empowering other women. And I'll tell you why. I've said Isabel of Castile didn't receive a good education in her youth. So she didn't know Latin when she became queen. And she took on, in that adult life, to learn Latin. but not, like a good mom and woman, not just her. She was like, everybody's going to learn Latin. Everybody at court is learning Latin now.
You're going to learn Latin. You're going to learn Latin.
And especially you. So what she did was, because she knew she couldn't teach this to her daughters, she brought in Beatriz Galindo, who was a young woman who was a Latinist, who knew Latin, to be in court with her, to, probably to read to the girls. She was a lady at her court. This Beatriz Galindo became so notorious, and she has an amazing biography too, because she went on to do. She was a patron of the arts. There was convents built because of her patronage, and she was a very powerful woman in Castile because of this too. And she even gave a name to one of the most amazing neighborhoods in Madrid called La Latina. So the Latinist, the female Latinist, right? So when we go to Madrid, I'm going to make Rebecca say here that she's going to come with me to Spain. In front of everybody.
I am. I just don't know
After
when.
we go to the Prado Museum.
Yes.
Because that's the first place, from the airport, we're getting a taxi to the Prado. That's the only way we're going to do this.
Okay.
After that, we can go to La Latina, and I can show you why Spanish people are famous for being fun and eating the best food in the world.
I like food, so...
Yeah, I know you do. And we have the best food, I'm happy to say. On the other hand, her daughter, Catherine, so this is a similarity. When she had to educate Mary, what she brought was Susanna Horenboot. To what? To teach her. She already knew Latin because Catherine had taught her that. To paint. Not just to paint. I'm so into this right now, and I'm studying so much about this. I think we put painting as, the noble art that only like Holbein and these people do. No. Embroidery, painting, design, goldsmithing, it was all interlinked. And it was all done with patents and things that these people were using. And there's a lot more collaboration. So let's think about this. Susanna Horenboot was married to John Parker first, who was in charge of the wardrobe. So I just imagine Susanna and Mary just enjoying, like, putting these dresses, and now paint me like this, and now, just like we have in our brains of a Renaissance court, but usually we tend to think about Italy, right?
Yeah.
When we think about that, or a bit later in the court of Philip II, because he gets that idea from seeing Mary Tudor later with Lavinia Turnick, with Sofoniso Anguissola, an Italian that he brings to be with his wife, Elizabeth of Valois. So, but the idea comes from, okay, we know Latin. What is the next thing? What is the coolest thing now? Because they are, above all, the marketing mothers.
That's right.
I think that's the conclusion. Marketing mothers, each generation does a new thing, empowering women. Like La Latina, Beatriz Galindo, or Susanna Horenboot, and Lavinia Turnick, and many others, because there's many women mentioned in these sources that are not mentioned by name, like silk women. I love the women that deal with the silk. Those must have been the coolest people in the Tudor court. The women, the women with the silks, right? It doesn't like somebody who's arrived with a bunch of silk and, what do you need?
Silk for you.
Silk for you. I brought this from Florence. I brought this from,
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing.
That was a woman's job.
I'm not surprised. That should be a woman's job, I think. Like, it's beautiful. It's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, and then it talks a lot about, as much as we say a lot that these people were separated, men and women, since John and Susanna were married, that wasn't an issue then, right? So a lot of these women artisans who are becoming artists, like Susanna, marry courtiers that are related to the wardrobe, the parties, Fun Guy, Holbein, all these people. Can you imagine that, being a party with Susanna Horenboot and Holbein and Fun Guy? And Anne Boleyn makes an appearance. Ooh!
That sounds like a good party, actually.
Yeah. And I would be like, look at that picture, Theron, look! Do you remember that, 1513? Holbein painted that. Mansa Hans painted that. Yep. In those sources, I'll finish with a bomb. How about that?
Oh, here we go. Okay.
In those sources, the first time that Holbein works for the crown, he paints a picture of Theron. And in that source, it's an amazing source. It talks about this and that and brushes and what it. And there's several mentions to colors that it says Spanish white and Spanish brown. And I was like, Spanish? Why Spanish if he's Massa Hans from Germany? First of all, in German, I mean, the monarch is the same because it's Charles V, right? So he's
Right.
King of Spain and Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, where Hans Holbein comes from. Oh, so that problem is solved. Anyone who has an issue with that. Second, I was reading a very, very cool book from the time, a bit later, from the reign of Elizabeth I by Nicholas Hilliard, the famous illuminator. I mentioned this when I talked to Alejandra Vergara about Clara Peters, or Peters, as he said, in this episode with him. And he wrote a book called The Art of Limning, which is the first book written about miniatures and the art of illumination in England. And he mentions a white made with quicksilver that the women artists employ, he says. In those, this is a very complex bomb. Very complex bomb. In those sources, going back to Hans Holbein, in those sources where the Spanish white and the Spanish brown are mentioned, and Holbein is painting this, there is an Italian woman called Alice Carmelian that is also involved in those celebrations and in the painting the triumphal arches that were made to two triumphal arches that were placed in front of that picture of Therouan. So this the Spanish white could be the white that Hilliard mentions, and Alice Carmelian from Italy. So that's a woman artist that nobody knows about in the Tudor court, for example. That's what I'm saying. There's so much to learn about these things, especially in art, and Hans Holbein, collaborating with women artists, something we've never really thought about. So that was my bomb for today. Holbein had some female colleagues we need to know more about.
Yeah, I think
all about him.
If anything, you have opened my eyes to how much art influenced court. I feel like we didn't talk about it much before you started to become a guest on the show. The influence of art is magnificent.
The obsession with the art. But I do come from a historical background of cultural history. The thing is, the art and the culture are interlinked. So, for example, in the dedication of these books to educate Mary Tudor, written by Vives and Erasmus of Rotterdam, another one on Christian matrimony, with the frontispiece by Holbein, published in 1526, the great year of 1526, they mention the art of portraiture and painter's work. These are all interlinked because there's a lot of metaphors in the Renaissance. Some are written and some are visual in the pictures that we love. This is why these Renaissance pictures sometimes are so complex and have so many symbols. And I'm thinking now, that makes me think about the Ambassadors by Holbein and all the symbology in that image, So I think I'm going crazy with all this. How do you think? I think, yeah, probably.
Well, you just made it through the very first episode of Dr. Emma and Me, where we talked about parallel lives. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. How about you?
I'm feeling pretty good, actually.
Really?
I mean, I didn't think it was going to go well.
What did I get into?
I didn't have much hope for this. So, I mean, it turns out.
I know. That's why you texted me that this morning, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, if you're listening right now and you love Dr. Emma and Me, make sure that you follow and subscribe to us on social media. You follow and subscribe to the podcast. Every Thursday, there's going to be a Dr. Emma and Me episode. And I very much look forward to this. Thank you, Emma, for joining me.
Yes, thank you. And let us know if you like the parallel lives idea so we can continue too. I think it's a great idea. Maybe one day it's parallel lives, Rebecca and Dr. Emma. Who knows?
Ooh, fascinating.
No, nobody wants to know about this, and we don't want to talk about that.
No, that's not quite as interesting.
Okay,
All
guys,
right,
thank you very much.
next
Have a great day.
Thursday, we'll see you again.
Yay!
Thank you so much for joining us for this first episode of Dr. Emma and me on Tudor's Dynasty and Beyond. If you enjoyed today's episode and want more drama, more history, and, well, more of Emma and me, be sure to subscribe and follow wherever you get your podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, head on over to patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty, where once you become a patron, you can get early access, exclusive content, and commercial-free episodes. I look forward to seeing you every week.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.